Today, I'm speaking with author and co-founder of the Insight Meditation Society and the Barre Center for Buddhist Studies, and a longtime friend of Sounds True, Sharon Salzberg. Sharon has been leading meditation retreats worldwide since 1974. Influenced by her more than 45 years of study with Burmese, Indian, and Tibetan teachers, she teaches intensive awareness practice and the profound cultivation of loving kindness and compassion. Sharon, welcome to the Meditation Summit.
Thank you so much.
45 years of studying and teaching meditation. How is it, though, that you first became introduced to the practice of loving kindness and became, if I dare say, the loving kindness meditation teacher of our time?
Wow, thank you. That's a great accolade. Thank you. Well, I went to India in 1970. I was a college student, and I went specifically to learn meditation. So I went as part of the university's independent study program. They had a program where if you created a project that they liked, you could go anywhere in the world theoretically for a year and do your project and then come back. So I created a project. I said, I want to go to India and study meditation. So I had no idea really what meditation was or, mechanics or different methodologies. I certainly didn't have any idea or actually, frankly, any big interest in belief systems. But I had heard that meditation could really affect your mind and make you happier. And I craved that. I really yearned for that. And so somehow I wish I knew that moment and exactly what happened. I decided to make it real and not just hold it as a theoretical possibility. And I went off to India. And all my first meditation courses, my whole introduction was around mindfulness. It was all insight meditation. And it was tremendous. And at the end of those courses, almost as a kind of ceremonial goodbye, just to end the retreat, we would do a little loving kindness practice. So I knew that it existed. I knew that it was about the deep cultivation of care and respect for yourself and for all beings. I knew that it was about belonging and having that sense of connection, not feeling so alone and isolated. So I always thought, okay, someday I'm going to dive deep into that particular approach to meditation and that particular technique. And I didn't really have the chance to do it until about 14 years later when I went to Burma and in 1985, and I did an intensive immersion into loving kindness practice.
Now, for many people, when they're first introduced to loving kindness meditation, like you described, it's kind of the end note of a period of mindful awareness practice. And they think, that's great, it's a little kind of end note, but, I'm not really drawn to it. I don't want to color my experience with invoking love. I like just finding out what's actually happening in my experience. I don't want to bias it in any way, even towards loving kindness. So how would you address that person right here at the outset?
Well, now, of course, I'd address it differently than I would have then. Then I was going on instinct, for myself, where I just had an instinct that this would be a compliment. This would be something that would help me, even help me be mindful. Because, to be with one's experience without so much judgment, without condemning, without fear, without shame, without blaming yourself. Like, I should have been able to stop this. I've been meditating for, 45 years. Why is this still here? That's not so easy. And for many of us, we need processes, whether it's in life or through meditation or whatever it might be, to come to that greater sense of balance so that we can greet a really big variety of experiences with that kind of mindfulness, that kind of awareness. And so for me, I was a very frightened person in many ways. And while mindfulness was a huge help, it was immensely transforming. I just had this instinct. Mindfulness would be easier for me if I had a kind of antidote to the fear that was so prevalent in my mind, and that is loving kindness. Now I would respond in a much more knowledgeable way And I would say that we're not trying to bias our experience, in contrast to mindfulness techniques, which are really about trying to come close to what's happening and see it for what is. We're not actually trying to replace the truth with something hypocritical or forced, like I'm full of love, but instead we're trying to stretch. So if we're accustomed to paying attention in a certain way and we're almost in a rut about that way of paying attention, we're actually going to stretch. We're going to make a little experiment and pay attention differently through the loving kindness. So one example is, if you're the kind of person who tends to, at the end of the day, like evaluate yourself, like how did I do today? And if you're the kind of person who pretty well just remembers what you did wrong, or the mistake you made, or what you could have done better, let's just say, so much so that your whole sense of who you are and all that you will ever be just collapses around that really stupid thing you said at lunch at the meeting. The process of loving kindness is stretching. It's not denying that mistake or that comment. It's not like insisting, oh, wasn't that a brilliant and witty thing I said at lunch? Maybe it was really stupid, and there are consequences for that. But that's not all that we are, ever. So we're challenging that collapse, that kind of rigid over-identification, by wishing ourselves well. Sometimes we actively look for the good in ourselves, not to deny what's, difficult, but to get a more truthful, bigger picture. And we actively wish ourselves well. And so that kind of gives airtime to what normally is left out in our consideration. Or another example would be, what about all the people we tend to look through? We overlook, we ignore, we discount. What about all the people that, or creatures, beings, who become like the other for us? Not even only through antipathy or prejudice or bias, but just indifference. Like, how many stores do we walk into and look right through the storekeeper, the person working behind the counter? How many people play a function in our lives that we objectify, that they might as well be a piece of furniture? For all we recognize, this is a living, breathing human being who wants to be happy just as we do. So what happens when we look at them, in effect, when we pay attention to them, when we wish them well? That's the experiment that we make through loving kindness.
Sharon, for people who are brand new to loving kindness meditation, can you go ahead and introduce the basics of how it works?
When we do loving kindness practice, we make that stretch. We step out of the more confined or familiar terrain of the way we pay attention through the silent repetition of certain phrases. The phrases guide our attention, and they expand our field of attention to be more inclusive and more connected. So the practice of loving kindness is considered like a practice of generosity. It's generosity of the spirit. So we make offerings of attention that honors our innate dignity and the innate dignity of all beings. The phrases need to be very simple, because we will offer them to ourselves and to others. So it can't be, may I get a good parking space tomorrow or something like that. Beginning with ourselves, usually it's something like, may I be safe, be happy, be healthy, live with ease. Live with ease means in the things of day-to-day life, like livelihood and family, may it not be such a struggle. May I live with ease. You don't have to use those phrases. You can make up phrases of your own. People often really feel good about using a phrase like, may I be peaceful, may you be peaceful, may I be filled with love, may you be filled with love, whatever it is. But 3 or 4 phrases that are general enough so that they can serve as an offering to ourselves and to others. And we gather all of our attention behind one phrase at a time. It's not a practice where you're trying to generate a feeling, manufacturing it or fabricating it. The power of the practice is said to come from our complete wholehearted presence behind just one phrase, and then the next. The skill set is very similar to other kinds of meditation practice in that it's usually not that long before our attention wanders. You do one phrase, maybe two phrases, maybe three, and your mind jumps to the past or jumps to the future or judgment or speculation. And we say the most important moment in the whole process is the next moment. It's after you've been gone, after you've been distracted or lost in thought or you've fallen asleep. That's the moment that's really critical, because in that moment we practice letting go gently, and we practice coming back to our chosen object, which in this case is the phrases. So we say that in any given moment, one of three things may be predominant in doing loving kindness practice. One is the phrase. One is the sense of the recipient. So sometimes that's visual, or sometimes it's just a sensibility about that person or being. It may not be a person, it might be a pet or something. And the third thing that's possible is a sense of connection. It's a certain kind of feeling. But the feeling will come and go. And if you don't have any feeling, it doesn't mean your practice is not working. It's working underneath the level of emotion. And so you don't have to despair and think, nothing's going on. It really is going on. And sometimes the sense of the recipient comes in and out. Not everybody has a great ease with visualization. Sometimes we have to sharpen that sense of the recipient because we're getting kind of dull or sleepy. But for the most part, the bottom line is the phrases. We can always come back to that. And so we repeat the phrases over and over again with enough space and enough silence so that it's a rhythm that's pleasing to you. And then we offer the phrases and therefore the loving kindness to others. So beginning with ourselves, the end of a session is usually the offering of loving kindness to all beings everywhere. And what we do in the middle could be different all of the time. Maybe you have a friend who's getting an award today and you want especially to include them. Or maybe you have somebody really who's helped you and you haven't spent a lot of time being grateful, you realize, and you want to be sure to include them. Or maybe we have a whole category of being that we offer loving kindness to called the neutral person. That is like the shopkeeper or your dry cleaner or somebody like that. Somebody who plays a function in your life that you usually look right through. And you're going to the dry cleaner that afternoon and you've chosen that person as your neutral person. And you want to be sure to include them. So that middle part is very creative. It's variable. It depends on how much time you have for any single session. But the bookends are generally starting with yourself and ending with all beings everywhere. And it's just this continually expansive process. And again, you won't feel great things for everybody. And honestly, it really doesn't matter. This is the kind of practice that it's challenging in many ways. And one way is that I have found over and over again in my own experience and in the experience of others that the real benefits come in your life. You may not have a moment when you're sitting there and you say, this is the great breakthrough experience. Now I love myself completely. But if you do the practice, if you pursue it, you will find that you're different when you make a mistake in the way you speak to yourself. And you're different meeting a stranger. And you're different with somebody where there's an adversarial relationship. You're different with somebody where you've held a lot of assumptions about them. And you realize those are just assumptions. There's so many ways in which you find the effect coming in your life. So if you can be patient enough to actually experiment with the practice for a while, and then check out actual relationships to see if it's having any benefit or not.
Sharon, let's go ahead and do the practice together, and then afterwards we can talk about it a bit.
Sure.
Okay.
You can sit comfortably. See if you can have some energy in your body. Your back straight, but not like so straight, that you're all uptight. You also want to be relaxed and at ease. You can also do this practice lying down. And close your eyes or not, however you feel most comfortable. Let your energy settle in your body. And see if there are 3 or 4 phrases. See if there are 3 or 4 phrases that work for you. They don't have to be perfect. Being words, they probably won't be perfect. But I say choose good enough phrases so that you feel okay offering this to yourself and offering it to others. Very common phrases are things like, may I be safe, be happy, be healthy, live with ease. Sometimes people don't like that construct, may I, may you. It's not meant to be pleading or imploring. It's like you hand someone a birthday card and you say, may you have a happy birthday. May you have a great new year. It's got some verve to it, some juice to it. So you can find the 3 or 4 phrases that work for you and begin repeating them over and over again with enough space and enough silence so that it's a rhythm that's pleasing to you. This is like the song of the heart. You don't have to be in a hurry. May I be safe, be happy, be healthy, live with ease. Or whatever your phrases may be. And remember, if your attention wanders, all you need to do is gently let go and begin again. You don't have to judge yourself. You don't have to feel like a failure. This is the actual training right there. May I be safe, be happy, be healthy, live with ease. The feeling tone is one of blessing. It's gift giving. And see if you can call to mind a benefactor. It's someone who's helped you. Maybe they've helped you directly. They've helped pick you up when you've fallen down. Or maybe they've inspired you from afar. This is like an embodiment of the force of love for you. Could be an adult, could be a child, could be a pet. Said to be the one whom when you think of them, you smile. So who makes you smile? And if someone comes to mind, you can get an image of them or say their name to yourself. get a feeling for their presence, and offer the phrases of loving kindness to them. May you be safe, be happy, be healthy, live with ease. Even if the words aren't perfect, it's okay, because the phrases are serving us. They're like the conduit. They're the vehicle for the energy of the heart. And just for fun, for a few minutes, why don't you see what it's like to have this benefactor offer loving kindness to you, so that you experience yourself as the recipient. If it's a pet, I suppose it needs to be with a look, with a feeling tone. Otherwise, the phrases directed to you, towards you. And if you have embarrassment arise, or discomfort, even gratitude or delight, you can just let the feelings wash through you. As you steady your attention on what it's like to be the recipient, either through the phrases or the sense of that energy. All kinds of feelings may come and go. That's okay. You can stabilize your attention on just being the recipient in that moment. You can offer loving kindness to someone you know who's pretty happy right now. They may not be perfectly happy, but at least in some arena of life, they're enjoying success or good fortune. So if someone like that comes to mind, bring them here. Again, you can get an image of them or say their name to yourself, get a feeling for their presence, and offer the phrases of loving kindness to them. And then someone you know who's not doing so well right now, who's struggling in some way, bring them here. See what it's like to offer the phrases of loving kindness to them. May you be safe, be happy, be healthy, live with ease. And then all beings everywhere, all people, all creatures, all those in existence, near and far, known and unknown. This vast expanse of life, the boundlessness of life. May all beings be safe, be happy, be healthy, live with ease. And when you feel ready, you can open your eyes or lift your gaze and end the session.
Thank you, Sharon.
Thank you.
Just a couple of clarifying questions about the practice. You encouraged people to come up with their own phrases if they felt inspired. So just a little guidance about that. Do I revert to the traditional phrases? Can I come up with anything I want to experiment with?
You really can come up with what you want to experiment with. They need to be broad enough so that it's not ludicrous when you're thinking of somebody else, you know? So generally speaking, it is things about happiness, freedom, peace of mind, sometimes peace of heart, and facing whatever comes our way in life. Something very broad and inclusive. And it needs to be just 3 or 4 phrases. Sometimes people get really wildly creative and they think, oh, I'll do 15 phrases, which they then can't remember. It's also fine to use the traditional phrases. You don't have to be inventive. It's only if you feel some sense of antipathy, like some people really don't like the word happy. For them, it implies something superficial or self-centered. And, if it's going to be a struggle, it's not worth using. It's much better to form your own.
Now, you mentioned that the words are carriers of this feeling tone that we have, this heart energy. And I'm curious, when you're doing the loving kindness meditation, do you feel your heart center lighting up in a certain way? What do you feel in your body as you're doing the practice?
It is a very embodied experience because it may not be emotional in the rather narrow confines of the way we tend to use the word emotion, which is another important point. People get very disappointed because they don't feel these enormous waves of a very gooey kind of loving state, or even just a warm loving state, and it really doesn't matter. But there's some kind of deep knowing in our bodies that our lives have something to do with one another, that we're connected. And so it's like a tremendous sense of presence and inclusivity that may or may not be very emotional. And people often say they feel it in their heart center, right in the center of their chest, or there's a kind of softening in general in our bodies as we pay attention. I will also say that one of the ways this practice is done, even classically, is in walking. And I love doing it walking down the streets of a city. You have to remember the phrases are silent. That's very important. And it's often done slightly differently in walking, in that I would rest my attention in the phrases for myself as the baseline. And sometimes 3 or 4 phrases is too many. So I might walk along at a normal pace, silently repeating, may I be happy, be peaceful, be happy, be peaceful. And then when someone comes into consciousness, person walks by, or you hear a dog, or you hear a bird, just for a few moments, you include them like, oh, be happy. And then you go back to the phrases for yourself. It's a fantastic and fun and enormously different way of getting through an airport or walking down the street.
Now, let's say in the meditative experience, you say a phrase. Maybe it's to yourself, or maybe it's to someone who's having a hard time right now, like, may you feel at peace. And what you touch into is a level of anguish in the recipient of the phrase. And it's painful. It's terribly painful to feel that anguish. What do I do at that point?
Usually there's just in terms of the method, there's a gradient. First of all, it's important to know that whatever we feel is what we feel, and there's plenty of anguish in this world. And it's not meant to be like a kind of happy-go-lucky practice, and everything is just so very nice. Many things in life are very, very far from nice, and we need to be able to sit with that and understand that that's the truth of things. At the same time, rather than having our energy toward that other person be one of fear, or I think a really interesting investigation to make is, when do we pull back from somebody? Actually, when do we withdraw? And many people will say, and I certainly would say from my own experience, it comes from 2 prominent places. One is when I feel powerless and I cannot bear that feeling, and so I will just withdraw from someone's suffering. The other is very correlated with that. It's kind of an over responsibility. Like, I have to fix this. I have to make this better, rather than actually just be there in accompaniment with somebody. And so the loving kindness actually provides a way of avoiding those habitual tendencies and actually being there in a different way. So sometimes we start with actually, even in that state of great distress, offering the loving kindness. And then sometimes it's too much, and so we become the logical recipient of the loving kindness because we're the ones who are so much suffering, in that particular moment. And then maybe that's too much too, and it doesn't make any sense in some way. So then we just drop the loving kindness and practice mindfulness, basically, so that we strengthen that ability to be with and tolerate and be okay with that terrible feeling and the terrible reality sometimes of what's happening.
And then I'm curious how this formal practice of loving kindness meditation might then be applied on the spot in different kinds of situations. For example, I think one of the hardest things that, at least I've heard reported from people, is they feel self-aggressive towards themselves when something happens, like they say something really stupid, for example, or make some other kind of mistake publicly or something like that. How could, in a situation like that, someone practice loving kindness on the spot for themselves?
Well, I mean, there are 2 things. One, of course, is the natural accumulation of steadily practicing loving kindness. It's like you don't have to wait until you've blown it, and it's harder because you're in public and you just said that stupid thing. But if every day that's part of like kind of your strength training, then it will be so much easier in that stickier, more complex situation. But right in that moment, I think, of course, you're starting to feel all those dreadful feelings of, like, I'm an idiot and I always will be, and nobody loves me and I don't deserve love anyway, and all those things are coming up. And right in that moment, I would say to myself, may you, or may I, depends on how you phrase it, may I be safe, may I be happy, or I'm okay. There's love in this world, actually. And it's so much more at hand when you've practiced it.
Sharon, just one final question. As we began this session together, I said, you're the loving kindness meditation woman of our time. And I meant it, actually. When I think of loving kindness meditation, I think of you. You're the person who introduced it to me and to many, many, many other people. And I'm curious if you have a perspective, if you will, on how that became your destiny for you to carry that torch in the world.
Well, thank you again. I did the practice in Burma in 1985 for that 3-month period. And then I practiced only loving kindness for about 4 years, whether I was on retreat or I was just sitting at home each day. And it was such a hugely important transformation for me as a vehicle. And as soon as I left Burma and I came back to the States, I started teaching it. And then my book, Loving Kindness, came out in 1995. It was my first book, and it was the first book and about loving kindness. And it was interesting because at the time there was a certain amount of disdain that came my way, like, oh, that's that's not like a real practice. You're not going to understand emptiness that way. That's just like feeling good. You're going to get attached to good feelings. And but I knew first, based on my own experience, how transforming it was, and also the role it could inevitably play in actually being able to be present with experience, instead of kind of being able to be present but really being very shameful at the same time, something like that. So it's been tremendously gratifying for me and rewarding to hear, all these years later, that so many people are moved by that practice. And a lot of people these days, interestingly enough, start with that practice. It's how they begin, and it becomes a tool that they can then take with them into anything else that they do.
Okay, I am going to tag on one final question here. I didn't know you practiced for 4 years loving kindness meditation. So that's and you said that you experienced a true transformation from that four. And so I'm curious, what changed for you in that 4-year period?
Well, I mean, so much. I mean, I think that the it wasn't only around that particular practice, but basically, I mean, one of the stories I tell, which is true, is that I used to be unable to give a talk, to speak publicly. Here I am, and so the format of our retreats, our intensive retreats, which was the way we always taught in the beginning, was people practice during the day, and there's questions and answers and stuff like that. And then there's a formal lecture at night, which I was teaching with, mostly it was Joseph Goldstein, sometimes Jack Cornfield as well. I could never, ever give the evening talk, ever, because I was just too frightened. And people used to go up to Joseph and yell at him and say, "Why won't you let her have a voice? Why won't you let her speak?" And he'd say, "I'd be delighted if she'd give a talk. She won't do it. Talk to her." But then it was largely through the experience of loving kindness. I mean, I gave talks before 85, but it was through the little bits I was doing that practice that I began to see that, the talk or a formal presentation or really any conversation was about connection. It wasn't about being perfect. It wasn't about, being an expert at something and being able to impart your expertise. It was simply about connection. And so the idea, the practice, the reality of loving kindness really changed my worldview. And then when I really did it intensively, it gave me a lot of tools, and kind of, that's what I talked about as like strength training, so I could be in all kinds of different situations and it would be there as something available to me.
Sharon, thank you so much for being part of the Meditation Summit and bringing loving kindness meditation to the Meditation Summit. Thank you.